Chapter 9. Finished already? Inquired Hortense, as Miriam came back to the kitchen next morning. Madame cut the lesson short, Miriam responded. They are going out for a drive. You are still sad, n'est-ce pas? Observed Hortense. That is not good on a morning like this. On the tip of Miriam's tongue, ready to pour out to any sympathetic ear, was the latest snub that Madame Ducresne had inflicted. That morning, Félicité had had a sudden impulse. Maman, she had begged, let Miriam go with us to drive in the carriage. Think, Maman, she has never even ridden in such a carriage as ours. Madame's icy glare had flicked both the eager young faces. You forget yourself, Félicité, was all she had said, but Miriam accepted the rebuke meant for her. No doubt she had forgotten herself. How could she think Félicité could really be her friend when she was a prisoner and a servant? But she was a Willard, too, and wasn't a Willard good enough to ride in a carriage with a Duchess? However, something warned her that she had best keep this disappointment to herself. It would never occur to Hortense to have her feelings hurt because she wasn't invited for a drive in the carriage. Better to allow Hortense to assume that it was worry and not snubbed pride that dampened her spirits. I'm going to take you to market with me, Hortense announced now. They cannot expect you to work all the time, and you can help me carry the vegetables. I ask Madame. She was back in a moment with permission. Presently both girls set out, red wool scarves tied about their heads, baskets swinging on their arms. Miriam's spirits bounced upwards. Shafts of sunlight slanted through the narrow street. Above the steep gabled rooftops the sky shone a brilliant October blue. That is the mayor's house, Hortense pointed out, as they descended the hill past the fine stone mansions. And there is the Séminaire de Saint-Sulpice. Miriam stared curiously through the iron gateway. Beyond the stone building, she caught a glimpse of quiet gardens beneath neat paths, of lovely old trees whose yellow leaves drifted gently into a tranquil pond. Against the high protecting walls, branches had been carefully trained to spread in graceful patterns. A priest in his dark robe was pruning a small fruit tree. How strange that men should have leisure to cultivate plants and trees not for sustenance at all, but merely for beauty. There was much about this place that she would like to ask Hortense, but the practical French words she had learned would never convey the questions that crowded her mind. They came out on the Rue de Saint-Paul. Between this long street and the river were crowded the busy shops of shoemakers, gunsmiths, hat-makers, bakers, furriers, with their wares displayed in windows and doorways. Beyond these rose the dingy warehouses that fronted the water's edge. What a bustling there was everywhere! Housewives stepped briskly toward the marketplace, nodding and chatting to one another. Servants in short skirts and bodices like her own, and matrons in flounces, with elaborately curled and powdered hair, mingled with soldiers in white uniforms laced with black, and priests in their dark robes. Along the street came two smiling sisters in grey robes, marshalling a group of little girls in neat wool dresses. As they passed, Miriam stopped to stare at the children's smooth, dark braids. "Why, they are Indian children!" she exclaimed. "But of course," answered Hortense. "They belong to the school." A school for Indian children. Miriam had never heard of such a thing. Back in Charlestown, in peace times, the Indian traders had sometimes been trailed by children, sly, dirty little rascals, skittish as wild animals. "Keep an eye on them," the settlers' wives had said. "They can steal a loaf of bread quicker than you can wink." Who had ever seen Indian children like these happy little girls, scrubbed and decorous and smiling? "What do they learn?" she asked wonderingly. "The same as French girls, to sing hymns and paint pictures and sew and embroider. Indian girls have very clever fingers for sewing." Miriam turned reluctantly from the charming procession to match the impatient stride of her friend. In a moment the Indians were forgotten as the sounds and colors and smells of the marketplace rose about her in such wealth. Housewives bargained shrilly over stalls piled high with golden carrots, glossy red apples, green lettuce and cabbage, and great orange pumpkins. Chickens squawked from wicker baskets. At the end of the row they stopped at the fish stall, and Hortense selected a huge silver cod and 4 loathsome snake-like eels. It was a pleasure to watch Hortense shop, to see her move from stall to stall, knowingly pinching the ripe fruit, keeping a sharp eye on the scales, battling good-naturedly for a bargain. "They all know your name," Miriam marveled. "Why, in my whole life I have never seen so many people as you have talked to just this morning." Hortense did not even hear her. She was standing stock still, her round cheeks quivering with excitement. "Regardez!" she exclaimed. "The courrier des bois! I thought they had all gone." There was a burst of raucous, rollicking song. Down the street, 4 abreast, causing everyone to step aside to make room, strode 4 young men. One of the 4, standing taller, singing louder, and striding a little more confidently than the others, captured every eye along the way. He was certainly the handsomest man Miriam had ever seen, yet he reminded her strikingly of Makoa. He moved with the same panther-like grace. His head and shoulders had the same arrogant lift. He was dressed almost like an Indian, too, in deerskin jacket and leather breeches. He was burned dark as a redskin, but the black hair that curled tight and short against his head, and the flashing white teeth, proclaimed him a Frenchman, and no ordinary habitant, by the way the humble folk moved out of his way. As the girls watched, he checked his rapid stride and raised an arm in greeting. Following his smile, Miriam saw a sight calculated to cause any young man to stand still. Reined in on the opposite side of the street were 2 sleekly matched horses, and, in a handsome carriage, behind a gold-braided footman, sat Madame Ducrest, out for her morning drive. Beside her was her daughter Félicité, a pink and white vision of ruffles and bows and powdered curls. Her pretty lips parted in a bewitching smile as the courier left his companion and bounded across the street. From the carriage a white-gloved hand stretched daintily, to which he bent with a flourish. Madame Ducrest was almost unrecognizable, so transformed with nods and smiles. As the 3 chatted, Hortense and Miriam were not the only ones who gaped, forgetting business and manners. "Ah, what a pair they make," sighed Hortense. "Both so handsome, n'est-ce pas?" "A pair," echoed Miriam. "Félicité and that courier?" "If Madame has her way," laughed Hortense. "At least, that's what they say. It won't be easy to snare that Pierre. He is a fox." "So that is the Pierre Félicité is always talking about?" Miriam was shocked. "Why, he looks like a savage." "Oh, they all just like that, the courrier des bois. It is part of the game. But that one, that Pierre, he is the grandson of Monsieur Le Roche. His grandpère made a fortune in the fur trade. Any girl in New France would be proud to marry a Le Roche." "Even you, Hortense?" teased Miriam, amused at her friend's respectful tone. Hortense was scandalized. "Pierre Le Roche is a nobleman," she said, flustered. "And even if he weren't, I'd never trade my jewels for any courrier." "What are courriers, Hortense?" "Fur traders. They go out on their own, not like the regular voyageurs. They think they are too good to work like ordinary folk. They leave their families and go off to trade with the Indians and get rich. A wild lot, most of them. They say they sleep in Indian wigwams and eat dirty Indian food, and when they come back in the summer, they spend everything they've earned." The courrier des bois, Pierre, had rejoined his companions across the street, and Miriam lost sight of him in her absorption with the carriage and its occupants. She admired the way the sleek horses lifted their feet daintily from the road, as though vain of the precious cargo they drew. Félicité was like a delicate flower. What must it be like to wear a dress like that and to ride so elegantly, to have gloves on one's hands, and to know that all along the way people turned their heads and stared? Lost in envious wonder, Miriam had no idea that at the same time that she stared at Félicité, at least one pair of eyes was as keenly fixed on her own face. She was completely unaware of the soldier who had halted nearby. Had she stayed demurely at Hortense's side, he would doubtless have gone on his way without daring to accost her. But as she stood, quite forgetful of herself, her attention was suddenly distracted by a familiar figure, a pair of erect shoulders and a head of grizzled hair. A little ahead of the carriage, James Johnson, accompanied by a French soldier, was just turning away from the street into an alleyway. Without an instant's thought, Miriam flung herself into the roadway. "James!" she screamed. "James, wait!" That James was already out of sight and could not possibly hear her did not matter, nor that her English words and her headlong rush would startle the marketplace. The young soldier who had been eyeing her leaped into action. Before she had run 3 steps, Miriam's flight was halted by a solid figure in her path. Even in her excitement, Miriam recognized the soldier who had stared at her so rudely that first night on the riverbank. But she could not bother with him now. She attempted to dart past him, and had almost made it when he caught her by the arm. For a moment she glared at him, and then, quicker than thought, She dropped the market basket, and her free hand came up in a vigorous slap against that grinning face. Wrenching herself free, she gathered up her skirts and ran, with all the fleetness that had once outstripped every boy at number 4. She had marked the place where James had turned, but she reached it too late. The alley was completely empty, and in the moment that she paused to get her bearings, the soldier caught up with her again, a half-dozen delighted boys at his heels. This time there was no breaking away from him. He meant business, and he was quickly reinforced by a fellow soldier at her other elbow. "Let me go!" Miriam stormed, frantic at missing James. She struggled furiously to free herself, aware, in a panic, that a curious crowd was already hemming her in.
"What is going on here?"
The voice was deliberate and authoritative. The crowd gave way before the tall figure that pushed its way through. Looking up, Miriam met the vastly amused gaze of the young Courrier des Bois.
"She was escaping. She is the English prisoner," the soldier boasted.
"I am not escaping!" Miriam cried. "That's ridiculous! Where could I escape to? You let go of her!"
The angry new comment came from Hortense, breathlessly elbowing her way through the spectators. Her indignation had no effect on the soldier. "She was escaping!" he shouted, twisting her arm tighter. Perhaps he was doing his duty, but certainly he was enjoying it. He had a red mark on his cheek to repay. Suddenly realizing that her violent struggles were only providing a spectacle, Miriam stood still. "That's enough," ordered Pierre Laroche. "You have nobly prevented your prisoner from escaping. Now let's hear what she has to say for herself. Let her go, my brave garçon." Miriam shook herself free as the soldiers reluctantly loosened their grip. Now all her frustration was directed toward the courrier.
"If people would only mind their own business," she flared. "I was trying to catch up with Captain Johnson. I saw him go down this street, and I could have caught up with him if only—"
"You could catch up with anyone, that I'll wager," laughed the courrier. "Parbleu, how you can run. Who are you, anyway?"
Miriam drew herself up. "I am Miriam Willard, Captain Johnson's sister."
"Captain Johnson had an audience with the governor," broke in the soldier. "He was on his way back to prison. They would all run away if they could."
"I was not running away!" "She's a stranger," put in Hortense. "She is with Madame Ducrest, and if you will allow her to come with me—"
"Ah, Madame Ducrest!" exclaimed Pierre. "Why didn't you say you were a servant of Madame's?"
Miriam's head went still higher. "I am only staying with Madame for a short time while the captain arranges for our ransom."
"I see. Well, we can easily check your story. We shall ask Madame herself."
Madame. She had entirely forgotten. As the crowd gave way, she saw that the carriage, with its 2 elegant occupants, still lingered at the street corner. Madame and Félicité must have witnessed this whole undignified affair. In panic and chagrin, Miriam would almost have surrendered herself to the soldier to be dragged off to jail, rather than face her mistress before this tittering crowd. But the courrier was determinedly leading the way, and, propelled by a soldier at each elbow, she had no choice but to follow. For a moment, as those chill blue eyes looked down from the lofty height of the carriage, Miriam feared that Madame Ducrest intended not to recognize her at all. But after an interminable inspection, the woman spoke.
"Let the girl go, messieurs. I am responsible for her. Miriam, what could have possessed you to create such a disgraceful scene?"
"Indeed, I am sorry to embarrass you, madame. I saw my brother James go down that street."
"That is an odd excuse. Your clothes are torn."
Miriam looked down at her bare shoulder, and flushed as she tried to pull together the ripped bodice.
"It is impossible for you to walk home in such a state," said Madame. "I suppose you will have to get into the carriage."
Feeling like a shamed child, Miriam climbed in beside Félicité, shrinking her disheveled self into as small a space as possible to avoid touching those fragrant ruffles.
"You may go about your errands, Hortense." Madame dismissed the anxious girl. "I should have thought I could trust you to take better care of your charge."
Madame gave a command to the driver, and then, as they drove away, remembered to change her stony disapproval to a gracious smile at the young Pierre. In spite of her disgrace, Miriam could not resist a last curious look. The courrier was bowing very low, with an elaborate flourish, and by the merest flick of his dancing black eyes, Miriam had the distinct impression that a corner of that flourish was intended for her. They drove for some time in silence. Félicité said nothing at all, merely gazed at Miriam with round, reproachful eyes misted with tears. Miriam felt impelled to speak. "You must not blame Hortense, madame," she attempted. "It was entirely my fault, and I know that my sister would be just as shocked as you. It is just that I want so much to know what happened to the others. Hortense told me that my brother-in-law is in prison, but I saw him turning that corner. Oh, madame, if you do know where they are, won't you please tell me?
If you desire to know about your family, I could have inquired for you, replied Madame. The members of my household are expected to conduct themselves with propriety. However, what can one expect of the uncivilized English? Miriam bit her tongue and kept silent. Not one of the three spoke another word until the house was reached. Then, just as Miriam was hurrying toward the kitchen, she heard a cautious whisper.
Miriam, wait!
It was Félicité.
I think I may know something about one of the children. Is there a little girl about so high, with red curls, something like yours, only lighter? Oh yes, that is Polly. Félicité, do you know where she is? I have seen her, nodded Félicité. The mayor's wife has brought her. I didn't think that she might be one of your family. But Polly is too little to do any work. Oh, she is not going to work. She is a very lucky girl. You see, the mayor's wife has never had a baby of her own, and now she is so happy that she has a little English child. She has named her Alphonsine, and she is going to make her a real little French girl.
Miriam was not sure what to think.
Well, if Polly is with someone kind, that is good, of course, she said at last. But won't this woman feel disappointed when we leave? We shan't be here long, you know. Oh, I don't think she will ever let Polly go, said Félicité doubtfully. She loves her very much.
James had better hurry, Miriam thought, making her way to the kitchen in a confusion of relief and alarm. Meanwhile, she would have to mend her own ways. Félicité at least seemed to have forgiven her, and she was sure that Hortense would bear no ill will. But would Madame ever trust her again?
That is not good on a morning like this.
On the tip of Miriam's tongue, ready to pour out to any sympathetic ear, was the latest snub that Madame du Cresne had inflicted. That morning, Félicité had had a sudden impulse.
Maman, she had begged, let Miriam go with us to drive in the carriage. Think, Maman, she has never even ridden in such a carriage as ours.
Madame's icy glare had flicked both the eager young faces, because she wasn't invited for a drive in the carriage. Better to allow Hortense to assume that it was worry and not snubbed pride that dampened her spirits.
I'm going to take you to market with me,
Hortense announced now.
They cannot expect you to work all the time, and you can help me carry the vegetables. I asked Madame.
She was back in a moment with permission. Presently both girls set out, red wool scarves tied about their heads.
Chapter 9. Finished already? Inquired Hortense, as Miriam came back to the kitchen next morning. Madame cut the lesson short, Miriam responded. They are going out for a drive. You are still sad, n'est-ce pas?
Observed Hortense. You forget yourself, Félicité, was all she had said. But Miriam accepted the rebuke meant for her. No doubt she had forgotten herself. How could she think Félicité could really be her friend when she was a prisoner and a servant? But she was a Willard, too, and wasn't a Willard good enough to ride in a carriage with a Duchess? However, something warned her that she had best keep this disappointment to herself. It would never occur to Hortense to have her feelings hurt, baskets swinging on their arms. Miriam's spirits bounced upwards. Shafts of sunlight slanted through the narrow street. Above the steep gabled rooftops, the sky shone a brilliant October blue.
That is the mayor's house,
Hortense pointed out, as they descended the hill past the fine stone mansions.
And there is the Séminaire de Saint-Sulpice.
Miriam stared curiously through the iron gateway. Beyond the stone building, she caught a glimpse of